One of the options that we have in PicturesToExe 9, which we've never had before, is the ability to turn keyframes on and off. But I suppose one of the questions we want to ask is, well, when would we want to do that? First of all of these keyframes I've just set up for a little demo are all turned on. If you look over on the right hand side, you'll see a tick in every one of those boxes for each of the keyframes that I've created, because I created the keyframes either by Alt Insert or right click and choose Clone. So I'm always taking the settings from the previous keyframe. Let me show you what I've got set up here by going back to the start and pressing play. Now we know keyframes are like waypoints, and that's what I've set up here. The second keyframe takes it to the right, the third down, the fourth back to the bottom left corner, and finally back up to where we started. Each of those keyframes were turned on. We're only using a pan here, left and right, and up and down. If I were to go to the second keyframe, the one that controls the movement from top left to top right, and I was to go back to the pan and turn it off, a little oblong shape moves to a surprising location, and we would think, well, we never moved it anywhere near that position. But you remember it went from there to there to there to there. Well, it's like us having a route on a map. We needed to go from home to the store and then on to a friend's house. But then we decide we don't want to go to the store, so we can go directly to the friend's house. So by turning off that keyframe, what we actually have is a logical piece of animation. We're cutting out the movement to the top right. Once we get to the third keyframe, of course, we return to the animation that's planned, because the animation keyframes are all turned on and they're guiding the movement. So all I need to do to put it right, of course, is to select the keyframe, turn it back on, and we're back in business. But if I decided that maybe the last keyframe I didn't require, and I untick that, once again we get an odd appearance. But when I go back to the start, of course there's no change when we first see the animation, because the animation change becomes evident now, because now it doesn't need to touch the bottom left corner. We've said don't go there, go directly back to the top left. Now we can use the turning on and off of the keyframes in a creative way, a way we wasn't able to do in previous versions of PicturesToExe. I think we've got a pretty good example for a practical use of turning the keyframes on and off in a 3D animation we created earlier. For now, I'd like to just select the last of these keyframes, and I've done that with the shift click, and I'm going to delete those. Remember, whenever we create a shape, bring in an image, or create text, the first keyframe is always created for us, and of course that must be turned on because it's holding the square or the oblong at the top left position. Now, throughout most of the videos on this set, I've suggested that if we wanted to place a keyframe, that we can move our cursor, or we can add the keyframe and move it later, doesn't matter which, but I've been suggesting we use either Alt Insert, which clones the keyframe and leaves them all turned on, as you can see. Let me delete that again. Another way we can do that is to right click and clone. Again, wherever we place this, all of the keyframes are turned on. Once again, I'll delete. But if I just insert a keyframe, either with the insert key or via a right click and add a keyframe, you'll notice it appears at the extreme right end and nothing is turned on at all. So we could drag this keyframe back. And if we wanted to actually move this object, we can go here, tick the box, then we've got the opportunity to move it. So what we've effectively done is turned the keyframe on. Let's take a look at this with our 3D animation. So here we have that original 3D animation, and we created a slide style too. Supposing we made a complex piece of animation, and then we decided, wouldn't it be nice if those first 4 images came up in monochrome? If we were working in earlier versions of PicturesToExe 9, that would be quite tedious to achieve. But now we can do it simply by turning off keyframes. Let me stop that running, select the image, and open the animation up in the Objects and Animations screen. Now we know from our previous work with this project that the image right at the bottom here is in actual fact the background, and all of those in between create the 4 inset images front and back. We also know that this is the parent and this is the child. It's the parent that carries the animation, the child just goes with the parent. So if we want to make the first 4 images monochrome, we can hold the control key and select all 4 of those, which just happen to be the parents, and we can see all of the keyframes that control the animation, and if we needed a memory refresher on what they actually do, we can scroll through and do that. But to change the first 4 images to monochrome, all I need to do is to go to these 4 keyframes and take away the color. So let's do that. Unfortunately, unlike the animation, if I select all 4 of those keyframes, the color correction filter here is grayed out. I do have to do these individually, so we'll just select them one at a time, and I'll go to my color corrections, add a filter, choose hue and saturation, and just click the saturation and take it fully off. We're not seeing anything at the moment because the image is transparent, but we can see it's happened and we can test it in a moment. So let's go to the next one and do the same thing. Let's move these down so we can get to these a little bit easier and get these 4 done as quick as we can. So there we have it. Let's bring this back up so we can see all of the images. So let me put my cursor back at the start and press play, and let's see what we've got here. The images should start to appear on screen, but they've appeared in color. Now, why on earth have they appeared in color when we've just taken the color from them? Well, it's very simple in fact. Although I have removed the color from this keyframe, the color here is still turned on. So what the software is trying to do, it sees the image is black and white at this point, but it's also fully opaque. When I bring it up, you can see it, in actual fact, it is black and white. So what the software is trying to do here, it's saying, well, you want it to be monochrome here, but here you're telling me to bring it back into color, and in certain circumstances that's quite a nice technique in itself. But here we don't need color in any of those other keyframes. If I hold the Shift key, select the first and go to the end, in actual fact I probably don't need all of them because by the time we get to this point these have spun round, but we may as well take the lot. So if I hold the Shift and click the last one, I select every one of those keyframes in between, and although we can't add or do anything to the filter, what we can do is turn them off. And when I turn them off and we go back to the start and press play, now because we've been able to turn off that keyframe, the monochrome will sit with the first 4 of those images, but of course we'd have to do the same with the 4 on the other side if that's what we wanted. But of course we may want to retain those as color, and we can do this simply by turning our keyframes on or off. So there's no real right or wrong way to create keyframes, whether we clone them or insert them, but there is a subtle difference. If I were to hit the insert key here once, twice, 3 times, there I've got 4 keyframes. The first keyframe, of course, controls the position of our oblong at the top left. If I go to the next one, nothing happens, of course, because not only have we not put any movement into that little shape, but the pan is turned off anyway. So I can turn it on, and I could move that to the right hand side. When I go to the next keyframe, an odd thing happens when I tick the pan box. Well, in actual fact, it's not that odd, because if I wanted now to pan down, the first thing I've got to do is to put that first movement in, and now I start to wonder whether the first movement is identical to the one that was in there. Now, in some certain circumstances it may not be. I'm talking about the values here, but in other times it might. But now, of course, from that keyframe to that keyframe, I could move it down to there. But surprise, surprise, when I select this one and tick the box, we're back at the top again. But maybe if I just move it down there, put my cursor back, you can see we achieve much the same thing, just a little bit differently, using the keyframes turned off. Now I've removed all of those inserted keyframes, and I'm going to place my cursor up here and clone one, Alt Insert, and I can make my animation pretty quick. Now if I'm going to clone a keyframe, it's going to remember where the object, text or image was last positioned. So when I move my cursor again and Alt Insert, now I can go all the way down here. I don't have my oblong shape jumping around the screen. And lastly, I can do that again. And you'll also notice, if I do it once more, I'm sure you're aware of this anyway, that because I've not paid any attention to the gaps between these, when we run the animation, the speed will be relevant to the time we've allowed it to happen. Very quick on the last travel back to the top left. So sometimes it's quite convenient to hit the insert key because it's a one finger press and very convenient. So if at any time animation you're expecting to happen doesn't, just have a look at the keyframes settings over on the right, because you may find the keyframe is turned off.